Welcome back to Tech Garage, presented by RockAuto.com. Well, donning the lab coat, that can only mean one thing, Garage Ed, that's right. This season, well, you asked for it, you got it. Brake systems from the front to the back. Man, we're going to talk about everything. We're going to throw in tech tips, and we're going to get you out in the driveway and make sure your brake system's in tip-top shape. Where do we start? Well, always at Tech Garage with the fundamentals. Perhaps we just look at a brake system. And of course, we got one laid out right here on a demo board for your view and pleasure. Check this out. It all starts right here at the brake pedal. Now our brake pedal, that's a big fulcrum or a leverage, kind of gives us an advantage, a mechanical advantage, as we go into the brake rod. Now the brake rod's going to push on this or a master cylinder, either or, depending if you have power brakes or you have mechanical brakes. Now the master cylinder, that's the heart of the system. That's the hydraulics. That's what's going to actually multiply pressure and send it down to our wheel brake system. You also have an emergency brake system right here, an emergency handle. And what that does, it mechanically actuates the brakes. So in case you have a hydraulic failure, well, it's not going to be a problem with the emergency brake. Now we get down to the actual wheel brakes. You can have four-wheel discs, or you can have four-wheel drums, or you can have a disc-drum combination. It doesn't make any difference. We're going to talk about them all. This one right here, this is a disc brake setup. It's got a caliper, it's got an actual rotor, and you got some brake pads in there. Over here, you have a drum brake system. A drum brake has a drum on here, you have a wheel cylinder, and some shoes inside of there. We'll break them down later. We have to understand a couple of terms though, and we got to get into brake physics. What's brake physics? Well, how do brakes stop the car? Brakes actually take kinetic energy and turn it into heat energy. Unlike an engine takes the fuel, converts heat energy into kinetic energy, which is moving. All right, so put your hands together, we start rubbing. If you rub harder, what's happening? It's creating heat. The whole job of the brake system is to dissipate that heat. How are we going to do it? Well, a term called coefficient of friction. If I take sandpaper and I try to slide it across the table, man, it's really hard to slide. That's a high coefficient of friction, the two surfaces to be rubbed together. Here's an ice cube right here. If I take that, wow, that thing goes right off. I can slide it right off the table. That's a low coefficient of friction. What do you want in your brake job? You want a high coefficient of friction. How are we going to achieve that? Well, it's all about that heat dissipation, my friends. We got a nice brake pad and a nice rotor. You put that on there. When you apply that pressure, those brake physics, the kinetic energy turns into static motion. It starts to stop. You dissipate heat. This is a high coefficient of friction. Come over here to our rotor assembly here with our worn out pads or no material at all. Man, that's a low coefficient of friction. It's never going to stop. Not to mention the heat dissipation itself. Our rotors here, this is a ginormous heat sink. So if I start to lose some of this meat, I lose the ability to transfer heat. Once I start boiling the brake system, it's ineffective. Not a good thing. This one right here, well, it's thin as can be. You can see it right here. It's not going to hold any heat. It's not going to dissipate heat. You got a major problem if you have a rotor like that. Last but not least, brake dynamics. Now, brake dynamics is pretty cool because you're going down the road. When you stop, it's energy in motion. And remember, it's still wanting to go forward, so that's a lot of energy. As a matter of fact, this blows my mind every time I talk about brakes. Listen to this. A 200 horsepower engine is capable of accelerating from 0 to 60 in 10 seconds. The brake system has to stop the car in 1/5 of the time. That makes your brakes comparable to 1,000 horsepower. You know, that's why we're so glad you chose brakes for our Garage Ed segment. 12 more weeks of brakes broken down into each section, in-depth, diagnostic tech tips. So make sure you join us next week when we start talking about rotors. We'll be right back with more Tech Garage brought to you by RockAuto.com.